Thank you very much for attending my talk, and that's a premiere for me. This is the earliest conference talk I've ever done at any conference. 8:30 is a primer for me, so let's hope that everyone is awake. I will try to rip you out of the rest of your sleep today. We have 40 minutes. I have 78 slides, so it's going to be a ride. And we are going to ride the elevator with domain-driven design. What that means and what that is something you will learn in that talk. So just a few words about myself. My name is Michael Plöd. I'm a fellow at a consulting company called InnoQ, long-time DDD practitioner, currently doing quite a bit of stuff with team topologies. And yeah, you may wonder what that elevator analogy may be. Let me ask you a question. Who has heard about that book from Gregor Hohpe? Quite a few folks. So that's the elevator that we want to ride in that book. So when Gregor was writing that book, I was a bit of a reviewer for him for the O'Reilly edition. And I always said, hey, there's quite a bit of DDD stuff there that we could pitch in here. And that was the idea for this talk. So what does this elevator thing mean? Gregor had a pretty good quote there in his book. He said, modern architects align organization and technology, reduce friction, and chart transformation journeys. In addition to working with UML and architecture styles, such architects ride the architect elevator. From the penthouse, where the business strategy is set, to the engine room, where the enabling technologies are implemented. They shun popular buzzwords in favor of a clear strategy defined by conscious decision-making. And what he means with riding the elevator is that as an architect, or I would say even as a lead developer, you should be able to communicate on various levels of your organization. And the plan, the typical topics when we ride this elevator up to the penthouse where the management sits, what are the typical topics in there? Make or buy decisions. How do I make my organization more agile? How do I structure teams? How can we transform our existing legacy software, maybe to the cloud? How to differentiate in a digital market? How can our teams become more autonomous? Then this term digitalization, at least in Germany, where I'm based from, digitalization is the buzzword in the penthouses of our bigger organizations nowadays. So how could that happen? And now the thing is, for this talk, what can we contribute to those topics, to these discussions, from the domain-driven design world? Now, the typical domain-driven design topics are stuff like domain modeling, identifying boundaries, shared understanding between domain experts and developers, categorizing of subdomains, context mapping, iterative design work. Now, how could these two things complement each other? What's in there for you? So if you already have a bit of a DDD knowledge, how can you leverage that in terms of an argumentation and a communication for your leadership persons, for your C-level, for higher management positions? And actually, there were quite a few parts in that quote from Gregor where we can correlate a little bit to the domain-driven design world. Aligning organization and technology, business strategy, implementing, conscious decision-making. And what I'm going to do throughout this talk, I will throw a bunch of very simplistic penthouse quotes your way. They may sound a little bit sarcastic at times. They may sound a little bit very simplified, but I don't mean that in any disrespect to those folks. But these are usually the stuff that you read on management slide decks and stuff like that. How can you pitch into that? So, for instance, we want to start an agile transformation. How can we do modeling, design, and requirements engineering in this scenario? I mean, just saying, we're agile, we're doing Scrum, is a little bit shallow. There is way more to that. Now, what I'm going to use in terms of referencing to domain-driven design work is work that has been published on GitHub by an organization called DDD Crew. And this is a collaborative effort from the domain-driven design community. A hint, I'm also a part of that, so I'm advertising to a certain degree or pitching some stuff that I have contributed to, but I think this is very valuable because everything on that organization is Creative Commons. Yeah? No one earns any money through that GitHub stuff. That's just open source stuff that's out there that you can use, that you can fork, that you can put on your decks and so on. And one of the parts of that is this DDD startup modeling process. So when you want to get started with domain-driven design, that may be a good idea to start. Now, the first thing that you see on this infographic here is a lot of iterations. Yeah, so one thing, domain-driven design is iterative by nature. Yeah? It wants to be iterative. It really heavily works with continuous improvement, continuous learning. Yeah? And if we take a look, for instance, in terms of an agile transformation or becoming more agile, we should take a look at the Agile Manifesto and compare a bunch of those principles to ideas in domain-driven design. So, for instance, there's this one down there. Wait a minute. Hello, mouse? Here we are. Business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. For instance, that's 100% an idea behind domain-driven design. Yeah. Also, changing requirements. Yeah. It's typical DDD modeling work that we do there. Also, other parts. Yeah. The most effective and efficient way of conveying information to and within the development team is face-to-face conversation. Yeah. DDD is all about collaborative modeling, about sitting together, getting a deeper insight into business things and so on. So, the key message here to the penthouse, if you want to become more agile and want to step beyond, yeah, let's do Scrum for development teams, there are a bunch of really good ideas in the DDD space for that task, because DDD wants to work in that and pulls Agile to the domain modeling world, also to IT strategy world. Another quote that I very often hear is, "We are business driven, everyone knows that." Yeah, okay, how business driven are you? Let's see how the alignment of business models is in your organization. And there's a part in that starter modeling process called the align phase. And that's not core DDD stuff, I have to say, but it's very, very valuable for our domain-driven design world. So typical questions that I always bring up when I talk to C-level managers or higher management levels are, hey, do your architects and lead developers understand the business model of their product? Very often when I work with these groups of folks, I ask them the question, hey, your application, how does it earn money? Can you tell me? What's the value proposition of your application? And an answer that I get very often is, Michael, that's a really good question. Let's think about that. Another perspective is there a shared understanding between various stakeholders regarding that business model? Yeah, and a technique that you could work with that is also heavily promoted by the DDD community is the business model canvas from Strategizer. As with all canvas techniques, this is a technique that helps you in asking questions. Now, this time about the business model. And what I very often do is when I help C-level managers or other leadership persons, is that I pass this canvas to various stakeholders of a certain application or a domain or something, and let them fill that out independently. And then we put those perspectives next to each other. It's crazy how big of a disalignment you very often identify there. Now, from an architect's perspective, how can you do proper architecture work when you don't even have an alignment on the business model? You will always disappoint someone. It's next to impossible. Yeah. Now, let me ask you a question. Who is working in an organization where this term digitalization is being tossed around heavily? Yeah. Now, what is the purpose of digitalization? Does anyone have an idea? What's that? A typical answer is, yeah, remove paperwork and put that stuff into a system or an app. Or let's have an app for the sake of having an app. Yeah? I see two purposes for digitalization. Purpose one is we want to improve an existing business model with tech. So you have an existing business model and you use technology to improve it. You drive down costs, you increase or you decrease, you improve on processing speeds. Yeah, for instance, that a mortgage loan application is being checked now within 1 business day instead of 3 business days. You reduce error counts, stuff like that. You don't change the business model a lot. You just use tech to improve it, maybe very often on the cost side of things. Now, the second part is that we create a whole new business model which is enabled by tech. That's something that we currently see heavily with all the generative AI, large language model stuff, and so on. Now, did you realize one thing? Business and tech appeared in both purposes. How can we be good at that without a collaboration, a really deep-going collaboration between both sides? I think you will end up with a bunch of apps that everyone is laughing about on Twitter, on Reddit, or on the App Store ratings. Yeah? Apps that solve no problem and very often introduce a new one. Yeah? Now, what do we very often hear in this context? Oh, let's do DevOps. Yeah? Let's move that. DevOps sounds good. Present at many conferences, I'm pretty sure if you walk out there, there are some booths with the DevOps logo or some sign DevOps here and there, out there. I'm pretty sure. Yeah? Now, what does DevOps mean? For me, personally, DevOps is most of all a culture. It's an engineering culture. Yeah? It's not Kubernetes and Rancher, Nginx, and whatever. It's a culture of collaboration between development and architecting skills and operating skills. So that means that with DevOps, this good old slogan, you build it, you run it. Yeah? So we have a team building stuff and then operating that stuff in production, being responsible. And the gold standard would be also having on-call duty on the weekends, in the evenings, the good old eat-your-own-dog food stuff. Now, how can we be good at that when we build stuff that is based on wrong assumptions? I think you can then do as much DevOps as you want. Now, a different perspective in terms of stakeholders would be if we add business domains experts to that game, so that we collaborate with them. And that is, and I have to admit, that's the most buzzwordy slide of my talk. Yeah? And that is basically the core idea behind domain-driven design. So that we can move from you build it, you run it, to a you design it, you build it, you run it. Isn't that the core idea between this cross-functional team idea? Yeah, that we have an end-to-end responsibility. And for me, DDD is also first and foremost a culture for domain modeling. It's a way of working. Yeah, there are some patterns like aggregates and anti-corruption layers and services and repositories and so on. But first of all, it's a way of collaboration. It's a way of iterative, evolutionary, collaborative design work. If those patterns suit us, nice. If they don't suit the problem, don't use them. That's totally cool for me. So I think a message that you can send is that cross-functional teams are a lot about you design it, you build it, and you run it. There's a good infographic for you. So if you are working in an organization where certain terms are being tossed around quite heavily, you can check, you can make a reality check with an infographic that has been published by a company called Amplitude. Huge props to the folks at Amplitude for that infographic. That serves me very well in a bunch of situations. Because very often I hear, oh, we have cross-functional product teams. do you really have cross-functional product teams? Do we really have a cross-functional collaboration from opportunity selection to running stuff in production? Is that the reality in your organization? Very often, we end up something like DevOps design dev collab or design as team members. So that can be a very good reality check. But if you want to shift left on this part, on this infographic, yeah, I think it is key that your developers and your architects have a thorough understanding of the business, and that the business also has a bit of understanding of tech. It's not just shoving stuff on top of developers all the time. You need to do DevOps, you need to do DevSecOps, DevSecBizOps, DevSecBizDataOps and stuff. Developers, you have to do this and this and that and that and that. No, it also includes the other side, and we need to enable them to do that. There is a good idea in the team topology space called the enabling team. If you want to shift left here, you have to have good enabling teams. Now, one thing of getting a better understanding is this discovery phase. Alberto Brandolini, the inventor of a method called event storming, once had a really good quote. He said, it's not the domain expert's knowledge that goes into production. It's the assumptions that are in the heads of the developers that go into production. And with domain-driven design, we want to reduce the amount of those assumptions. Now, you could think, what could possibly go wrong here? I have a very nasty example for you. Let's take a look at that hotel room. Yeah? It's not the Arena Hotel next to the conference venue. That was in Zurich, at the Zurich Sea. And how would usual people from the business name these things in the hotel room? Yeah, we have stuff like a window, a TV, a painting, a desk, a chair, a trolley. Everyone would agree, of course. Now, imagine we implement that room as code. What kind of names would I very often see in code bases when I do code reviews, architecture reviews, or stuff like that? I see terms like transparency factory, decorator input, entertainment provider singleton, work enablement device, rollable stuff container, or REST provider. Yeah? So there's already a language gap somewhere. You're laughing. I had one customer where that was a fancy fashion retail customer. So they were really selling expensive fashion stuff, really fancy stuff. And the language of the DB2 database on their mainframe was leaking to the sales floor, because when you wanted to search the stock, you needed to navigate on a 3270 terminal, which is a mainframe UI. And there you had fields like T_FIL_SRC. Folks, fancily dressed on the sales floor, were talking about table names of a DB2 database on the mainframe. Crazy. It was interesting. My domain-driven design heart was bleeding at that moment when I realized that, I have to say. Now, how do many organizations address that? Yeah? Let's introduce requirements engineers. Yeah? I studied business informatics, and at university, my professor always told me, Michael, you need to stitch the programming stuff. That's going to be done by AIs later on. He may be right with that to a certain degree, if I look at Copilot and stuff. But you have to become a business analyst. And that's a quote. He said, you have to translate business language to technical language, and technical language to business language. I was always like, why don't they talk together directly? Well, that's impossible, that doesn't work. I think it works. But it depends how we set this up. Now, if you have a setup like that, you may run into problems, yeah, because you're basically throwing specifications over fences in that picture. And there was a very good research in the product development community, heavily driven by Marty Kagan, who wrote a bunch of really good books. And a good quote for that, if you're using your engineers just to code, you're only getting about half their value, because a very important feedback for the best features and product ideas come from team brainstorming. And let's be honest, if you look down there, external consultants, 4%, don't listen to folks like me in those regards. Yeah, I shouldn't have a say in that stuff. Yeah. Now, what should you propose to the penthouse? Hey, if you want to do agile modeling and agile transformation, digitalization, there are methods from the DDD space that could help you with that. For instance, collaborative modeling techniques like event modeling, domain storming, event storming, example mapping from the behavior-driven development community, or user story mapping from the agile product development community. So a key message for the penthouse from a DDD space for you in terms of a communication, we have something. Yeah? There is something there that can work, yeah, that also adopts nicely to agile disciplines like the user story mapping stuff and so on. And very often I see business teams also running design thinking initiatives. So you as an architect or a lead developer that wants to promote domain-driven design a little bit and find a good key messages for your management team, you can say, hey, we have stuff on the technical side that can build a bridge. And building bridges is a really important task for a modern architect in my eyes. Bridges to other stakeholders. So you can say, there is something, let's give it a shot, let's do that. Also, that very often happens with the quote, we want to become a tech-enabled product organization. Sounds great, doesn't it? Reads perfectly good on any slide deck. Now, what does that mean? Yeah, it's first of all a shift from projects to products. Yeah, tech becomes a core strategic asset. Yeah, and very often we see that also in a shift of strategy. Yeah, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, many IT organizations have been set up as cost centers. Yeah, IT should be cheap, 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 cheap. So everyone was optimizing for economies of scale. Don't repeat yourself. Reusability, reusability, reusability was super important. Nowadays, we see a shift in strategy in many organizations. Tech IT suddenly becomes a strategic asset in an organization, combined with many insourcing strategies. So if I can talk, if you allow me to talk from the German market, yeah, with our car makers and stuff, or the banks, they had heavy outsourcing programs 20 years ago. Yeah, so I started my career in banking, and they said to me after 2 years, Michael, if you want to make a career here, you have to become a vendor manager. You need to manage external vendors who do the development work. You're not supposed to write any code in our house again. I was like, thank you, goodbye. Not my career path, something like that. But what we see now is that they realized, oh, we're in deep trouble. We need development competencies in-house. Yeah? We need to bring them in again. Yeah? And this is also why these organizations nowadays optimize for economies of speed, of delivery, yeah? Improving time to market, improving deployment frequencies in high quality, yeah? If you look at the DORA metrics, for instance. And the driver for that are typical innovation cycles. And I have to give huge props to Nick Thune from the DDD community. Please check out Nick's content, it's amazing. And he came up with this visualization in one of his talks, and I'm heavily quoting Nick on that slide. So he said, hey, take a look. Teams are taking a look at what's happening on the market. The market is always expecting a better and better user experience. Now, a lot of that is driven by software nowadays. Yeah? As Andrew Horowitz said a couple of years ago, software is eating the world. And that architecture is again being developed by teams. I think nowadays it's more important than ever to have an evolutionary software architecture. A software architecture that can be part of an evolution, that can adapt to a changing market at a high speed. Alan Holub, a very respectable person whom I really appreciate a lot from the Agile community, said that the key to an incremental architecture is to build on a framework that can accommodate change. And that framework is the domain. By modeling the domain, you can more easily handle changes to the domain. What does that mean? It means we should align our architecture to domain. There's another great book out there, and I'm pretty sure quite a few folks here have heard about that, Accelerate, from Dr. Nicole Forsgren, Jess Humble, and Gene Kim, where they did research what makes up a high-performing IT delivery organization, backed by a really renowned and substantial scientific research. So that's not ideas what they present on that book, that's scientific results, double-checked, cross-checked, and so on. And one of the ideas, or not ideas, of the statements that they derived from their research was that a loosely coupled software architecture and an organizational structure to match is a key predictor of continuous delivery performance and being able to scale the organization and the performance in a linear fashion. Performance, I mean delivery performance of teams. So basically, that means this. And this triangle here is, in my eyes, the essence of strategic domain-driven design. That's what we want to achieve in strategic DDD. Now, you could also draw parallels to product thinking. For instance, this quote by Naren Katakam. He mentions problem and solution space. The domain-driven design world also mentions problem and solution space and has equivalent ideas to that. Domains and subdomains are in the problem space, bounded context and all the technical DDD stuff is in the solution space. Now, what are domains? They live in the problem space. They are how an organization perceives its areas of activity and expertise. And we want to go ahead and have a dissection of domains into subdomains. And there's this decomposition phase in this startup process. Where we, with collaborative modeling, go ahead, and there's a bunch of heuristics. We don't have the time to go deep into those heuristics, or at all into those heuristics, based on, for instance, event storming, domain storytelling stuff, how we can derive subdomains out of a domain. And this is very helpful, because it helps us. We can drive that even further in the DDD space. So one thing is, let's go all in on software as a service, standard software, off-the-shelf software, and the cloud. Is that a good idea? Let's think a little bit in a strategic fashion. The DDD space knows 3 categories for subdomains. Core domains, core subdomains, are really vital to your business. They are strategic. You want to have a high degree of differentiation in a high complexity in there. Generic stuff is something you don't care about. For instance, if someone books a training with me as a trainer, I always hope that they don't book the training because we have the best travel expense system. That would be a little bit embarrassing for me as a trainer. And then there's those subdomains. And there's a heuristic called core domain charts, how you can derive and see what is core, what is supporting, what is generic. Now, what can you do with that? That bank I was telling you about, there was this quote, "We're a bank, not a software shop." It's an original quote. And now I have some explicit questions for the penthouse here. How are your teams staffed? How's the staffing of your organization? Where are external developers? Where do you have internal development teams? I think this is not cool. To be honest, I actually want to have the internal development capabilities in my core domains. I want to have that in my control. I want to be independent. That's the stuff where I want to spend my money, where I want to drive things at a high speed. I want to be in control. I don't want to be dependent on any external software delivery organizations or stuff like that. Whereas, for instance, in a generic or in a supporting subdomain, I could think about offshoring, nearshoring, or stuff like that. So there are heuristics, how you could work with staffing decisions in there. Another thing is make or buy decisions. So you don't want to have SAP in your core domain, for instance. Why? It's standard software. A core domain implies high differentiation. How can you differentiate in a standard software that everyone can buy? I already hear the thoughts, customization. Do we really want to customize standard software to death? No, that doesn't make any sense. So this is where you want to write your own software. Control, speed, independence. And the generic side, I, for instance, would never write a single line of code. Maybe integration code, yeah, that integrates with the rest of the world. In that area, I would even go as far as adjusting my processes to the vision of SAP, for instance. In the supporting stuff, yeah, we may customize a little bit here and there, especially in the not so differentiating part. So that can be a really good guidance for staffing and strategic make or buy decisions. Yeah. Also for budgeting. You want to spend most of your budget, you want to spend most of your budget in the core domains. Also for budgeting, that can be a thing. But please be aware, this stuff changes. So if you do a legacy transformation, you will always have in the back of your head and make your management team aware that stuff that has been super differentiating 20 years ago may be a commodity nowadays. Why still treat it like that in a transformation? Doesn't make any sense. Yeah? Now, one more thing. We want agile cross-functional teams which are autonomous and which can deliver fast. A quote that I hear in this context very often is, let's do microservices. Okay, yeah, they can be a building block for that, but only a building block. Think about the environment in which those teams operate. How can they make decisions? Do they have boundaries in which we can reduce cross-team collaboration, cross-team coordination? Yeah. Again here, let's take a look at some things in terms of DDD. I think the bounded context is a great idea for that. Yeah? And what we want to have is a high degree of alignment between problem and solution space. And so basically, we want to work towards bounded context. And there is a great tool for that. Again, a canvas technique that can help you in identifying and defining those boundaries. And why is that important? Because in the DDD space, in this organized part, yeah, we want to organize teams around bounded contexts. As, for instance, the team topologies folks said, the bounded context is a team-first boundary. So that's a boundary that can be pretty suitable for a team, for a cross-functional team. And just a hint, I would say 80% of the DDD workshops that I'm now running as a consultant with my customers target at finding boundaries for teams. Yeah? And then aligning the software boundaries to that. Because cognitive load is a really important thing. So within that boundary, can a cross-functional team of 6 to 7 persons maybe learn and master the domain complexity, conduct experiments, learn in there, and still be able to deliver high-value software? There's a great book by Daniel H. Pink called Drive. Yeah? And Daniel did some research and found out that how can you get motivated individuals and teams? It's with autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Now let me reflect those ideas to some DDD kind of things in that area. In terms of autonomy, yeah, we want to find teams that are loosely coupled organizational-wise and where cross-team coordination is being reduced, that a lot of decisions are being made in that boundary of that team. Mastery, the members of the team can master and learn the complexity of the domain. Purpose, yeah, each domain has a clear purpose which can be described and which has clear boundaries. And domain-driven design helps you in finding those boundaries. And I think that's something that a lot of managers nowadays, especially also in agile transformation projects, yeah, are poking their heads around. We can even move these things a little bit further with team topologies and maybe the unfixed model by Jürgen Appelo. Tomorrow at 9:30, I will have another talk about context maps and team topologies. So if you want to have a deep dive on that, I will talk about that stuff for another, I think it's 40 minutes again. But there are really great ideas, and those two concepts, those two ideas, are not DDD stuff, but they perfectly adapt to the DDD world. And also the team topologies folks, they very explicitly mention domain-driven design in their book. They even released a free mini book, by the way, finding good boundaries for high-performing teams with domain-driven design and team topologies. So you can download that for free. And also the strategic DDD space has something like that, the context maps. 20 years old, this stuff. And this is a very holistic view on socio-technical relationships between teams and systems, because it doesn't just look at team relationships, it also takes a look at coupling of models, of databases, of systems, and also some API and technical aspects, and helps you to visualize team communication. Yeah? So there are a bunch of patterns, and I would say in the upper space, yeah, we have a high need for communication bandwidth between those teams, or a low communication bandwidth. Now, what I very often also use with my customers on a management level is context mapping stuff for visualizing political play in an organization, political dynamics. For instance, there is this customer-supplier relationship which can be misused sometimes by certain players in an organization. So this is also very, very interesting to visualize political dynamics in an organization. All right, so now you have pitched all of that stuff to your management. And you sold DDD to them. And now their answer is great. That sounds like a silver bullet that solves everything. Let's start a DDD initiative. No. I'm sorry, nothing in this talk was a silver bullet. Nothing. I think there are a bunch of good ideas. And I like quite a few of those ideas. A lot of that stuff helped me in communicating with stakeholders in the penthouse. But please always mind the realities, the culture, the situation of your organization. You don't have to do all of that at once. Use the things that I introduced that solve your problems. Don't use the stuff that introduces new problems. Nothing here is a silver bullet. That's very important. I mean, you see, I talk about that stuff with a bit of passion, but I'm not dogmatic in any kind of way of that. Yeah, I want to solve problems, and please also have that thing. I see way too much cargo culting around domain-driven design these days, and please don't do that. All right, that's it from my side. I think we have a bunch of 3 more minutes for questions. Thank you very much. I'll be around at the conference, so if you have any further questions that go beyond that, hit me up on the exhibition floor or at the party tonight. I'll have another talk tomorrow at 9:30 about team topologies and context maps as a deep dive. And yeah, thank you very much. Are there any questions? No questions? So, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.